So now we come to the cost benefit analysis. We've got all of our options, and what we need to do is compare those to see which is the most optimal, which is the best one for us to try to proceed with. So what we're doing here, for each option, we're going to consider the incremental costs and the incremental benefits and also risks for each of the options. And when I use the term incremental, the incremental is compared to where we are today, which is often our do nothing case. So now, the other thing that we've got to bear in mind when we do our cost benefit analysis is that if these costs and benefits do appear over multiple years, then we need to establish a present value. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But ultimately, one of the first things is recognizing that the structure of what we're trying to do here is to say, well, our do nothing, our base case is where we are today. And this is what's currently happening. And then we're going to compare those option 1, 2, 3, and however different many options, the relative benefits and the relative costs, and any associated risks back to that base case. And ultimately, once we've decided on some of that, the next steps that we want to be trying to take is to think about, well, which of them the best, most optimum with that, which one delivers the most benefits for the most costs. But before we get to that, when we're looking at our benefits, how do we identify the benefits? How do we make sure we've captured them all? So again, we've got to identify the benefits that link back to our objectives. The objective statement, what we're trying to achieve, is ultimately gives us that framing position. So what are some of those benefits that are coming about? And this could be things like we might yield quite simply some cost savings. We might have some efficiencies within a process. There might be additional sales. All kinds of different things that can come out in terms of benefit. But we've also got to consider not just financial benefits, but also non-financial benefits. And with those non-financial benefits might be something like customer satisfaction, it might be community engagement, it might be health outcomes. There's a whole raft of other things. And very often, especially if you are a little bit more of a service organization, then those non-financial benefits can be quite telling in terms of the position within your business case. So it's really important to recognize those. And the other thing as we identify those benefits is to be thinking about how can they be quantified and how can we track them for our business case. And we need to be able to demonstrate that. So by that, are we able to measure them? And again, that sounds easier if it's a quantifiable thing like with some savings, but even with savings, understanding where are we now? How are we actually going to track savings from our current position? Are we going to, if there's a natural growth in costs anyway, then how are we going to track out and take that growth so that then the overall savings we can bring back together? The other thing from there is to think about how long will it take for those benefits to materialize? So for what period, and then how long do they sustain for? So do we start getting these benefits straight away as soon as we've implemented our case? And when they go on indefinitely, or is it just after 4 years they're pretty much going to erode away? And then we need to do the same from a cost perspective. What are the costs of delivering each of our options? And once again, there may be some financial and non-financial costs, but make sure we've got to consider all of those as we've come through. The other thing that's really important from a cost perspective, especially where we've got some capital that we're putting in, so we've got some initial outlay within our project, is there any then ongoing operating costs for the item? So making sure we've identified those, if we need more resources or if we need increased maintenance or whatever it may well be, licenses, support, depending on what our option is. But thinking about those ongoing operating costs is a really important part to make sure that we don't miss those. And then similar to with the benefits, when will they be incurred and for how long will those costs sustain? Are the costs going to be there, again, indefinitely along with the benefits, or is there a particular time period that after 4 or 5 years, which is where we're going to assess our case over, then they're pretty much disappearing out of the system. So that's the thing about trying to identify our costs and benefits. But then the next thing that we want to be trying to do is to say, how do we then value them? And this is the bit where it gets a little bit more technical in a sense. And often we'll go to a finance business partner to try to help with this if this isn't your area of skill set. But one way we can do it is, especially if we've got a simpler case, is just really looking at the relative cost benefit analysis. So what you can see on the screen here is a little grid, a 5x5 grid. And we'll look at the relative cost and the relative benefit in the sense there. So we're just looking at this from a size or a scale perspective. So if you have a case that's got a very large benefit, we'll give that a 5. If it's very medium, then it's a 3. And that we might want to define those. Ideally, we will, but or we might just look at them relative to each other. And then you've got the cost. So how expensive is it going to be over the whole of the life of the investment in a sense? And again, we can score that between 1 to 5. And then what we can do is we can do a very simple cost benefit ratio. If, for example, here we're looking at option 3, which has got a benefit of 5, and we've scored it 3 in terms of its cost. So we'll give that as a 5 divided by 3, gives us an overall simple benefit cost ratio of 1.7. And we can do that for each of the options. And what we would see here is the one that looks ideal is option 2, because we move the needle quite a bit from a benefit perspective, but it's a very low cost option in the sense there. Of course, this is a very simplistic measure, but it's a nice little way of trying to work through and understand those. Now, if we do want to be more sophisticated, then that benefit to cost ratio really wants to be looking at the present value of our benefits divided by the present value of the cost. So with that, we want to be trying to quantify all of those benefits and quantify all of the costs. And then we'll bring that back in that present value, which is just for the timing of those costs and benefits. And we're going to talk about that a little more in a moment. So if we think about this concept of present value, what is it trying to do? Well, when we're looking, especially at something like a business case, we're often comparing investments that might have different cash flows, i.e. the benefits appear at different times throughout the life cycle, and the costs are incurred throughout different lives as well. So this is generally when we're into multi-year investments that we'd start wanting to consider this. And what we're trying to do with present value is we're recognizing the time value of money. And the simple chart that I pop up on the screen now is that this shows you the value of $100 in years 1 to 20 using a 10% discount rate. Now, so what on earth does that mean? Well, a 10% discount rate, this is often usually set if you're within an organization by your weighted average cost of capital, or the more social organization might be a social discount rate that you need to try to achieve. But what it's recognizing is that if I had $100 today, then I would put it to good use and I can create a 10% return on that. And so next year it'd be $110. What we're doing with present value is we're sort of inverting that and recognizing that if I don't get $100 until next year, I've lost the opportunity to get that 10% return. So therefore it's worth 10% less to me in a sense. So what we can see on the chart here is $100 after, if I receive that $100 in 1 year, it's actually only worth to me $90.90 or $90.9. And what that means is that I've lost the opportunity to generate 10%. Right? So the way I've calculated that is I've done $100 divided by 1 plus 10%, so divided by 1.1. And the way we can check the calculation is we can come back and say, well, if I had $90.90 and I received a 10% return, then that would give me my $100 back in a sense. So that's really all we're doing, is recognizing that I don't have the opportunity to get that return over that period of time. And you can see how it starts falling away very quickly. So for example, if I don't receive that $100 benefit until year 3, then in today's money, that's only worth $75 for me, or $75.1. And we go all the way out to year 20. Well, now it's worth less than $15. It's $14.90. So this is the compounding effect, but also the effect of this discount rate. And what we're doing with our present value calculation is we're applying this concept to all of our benefits, all of our costs, to make sure that then we can calculate the net present value. So here we have a very simple theoretical calculation, but let's imagine we're creating a new tweak to our system. It could be getting a little bit more marketing, and we're going to generate some additional sales from that. But actually, as we're tweaking the system, it's a fair upgrade and implementation is going to cost us $625,000, and we will incur that cost today. And we'll see that here on the screen, the 625,000 capital investment. And if we're looking at the costs, will continue on from there. We've also got some staffing and overhead for people who need to manage the system, coordinate the sales, and actually ship the product and work through those. And what we can see is that starts off at $125,000, increasing to $190,000 in years 3, 4, and 5. Now, if we go up to the top part, the benefits, that represents the additional sales. So see, they don't all come on board immediately at the end of year one. We assume it takes us half a year to get the system up and running, and the new product and ready to go. So we get those sales going up. We'll receive $235,000 in year one, then increasing to $452,000 in year two, and then maxing out at $528,000 in years 3, 4, and 5. Now that's all okay. They're the hard numbers. They're the simple numbers that we would drop into our cash flow and at the start from here. Now what we do, we've created then, if I come down the benefit line, we create an annual cash flow total, which is really just adding all the lines above. And in this case, there's only one line above, so it's exactly the same. Then I apply my discount factor. So here in year 0, the discount factor is 1 because the money is received today. So we're not discounting at all. But this is where you'll recognize there's a 10% discount with this 9.09 or 0.909, sorry. So our $235,000, when I multiply that by 0.909, it's actually in present value terms is only worth $213,636. And we carry on for our benefits in year 2, 452,000. Well, now we'll multiply it by that discount factor of 0.8264, and that is only worth 373,554. And we continue on doing the same calculation, albeit with an extra layer of discounting for years 3, 4, and 5. And then we can add the total of all of those annual discounted cash flows up to give us a discounted or present value of our benefits of $1,672,362,000. Now, if we come down then to the costs, we do exactly the same thing, but this time when we do the annual cash flow, we add that up. It's got 2 lines, so it's the sum of both lines, but in some cases there's only one number above them. We would then apply the same discount rate, but note the capital that we're incurring in this year doesn't get discounted because it's happening this year. Then in the future years, our costs will be discounted as we start ramping up the overheads. Then they will get discounted. So in year 1, 0.9091 again, and the same thing. So 125,000 times the 0.9091 is 113,636. Now, just a simple presentational thing, but note here it's important to keep cash in or the money coming in as a positive number and the money going out as a negative. Some of the mistakes we sometimes make with this calculation is just mixing up our ins and outs. So if we keep it really clean and simple in the formatting, it makes it so much easier. So all of our money going out is shown as a negative here. So in year 2, 175,000 and 0.8264. Which gives us 144,628. And we continue again, the same thing, year 3, 4, and 5 will give us a total present value of our costs of 1,273,762. So now, if we want to understand what's the net present value of this initiative, is it worth carrying on for? Well, so what we've got here is we say 1,672 of our benefits, and we've got 1,273 in terms of our costs here. And the net present value is those two figures added together, so the plus and the minus in terms of the cost, which leaves us a net present value of $398,600. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that we get a better return than 10% a year, which is our discount factor. And if that's our weighted average cost of capital, the return that we need to get for our business, then this is a good project on the face of it. The thing we want to do, because of course we can get a bigger dollar net present value if we have a bigger investment. So let's also look at the benefits relative to the cost. So this takes out the size, if you like. It tries to compensate for that. So if I have a smaller investment, I can compare that to a larger investment. So the benefit cost ratio, what I'm doing is I'm taking my present value of the benefits, 1672362, divided by, in this case, the absolute number, so 1273762, and that gives me a benefit cost ratio of 1.31. So again, what that is telling me is over a present value, the benefits are greater than the present value of my costs, and therefore it's a worthwhile investment. The benefit cost ratio, really, we want a ratio that's greater than one. The other thing that we So one of the challenges with the cost-benefit analysis, or one of many, is that we have to make a lot of assumptions. In that simple scenario that we've just seen, um, if we do developing, we make an upgrade to our system and that will yield more sales, but how much more sales? What's the assumption that we're making? Do we need to capture more market data? How much is it actually going to cost us to implement the system? Are there new development costs and sense? So we'll be making some assumptions around those. And how long will the actual project take? So what we can do with this is to start trying to understand, well, how strong is our case? How much confidence have we got that? And we can do that through some sensitivity analysis. And what we're doing with the sensitivity analysis is we're just going to vary some of those key assumptions, the assumptions that are really driving our case. So in this case, the adoption rate, how much if we get 15% more take up or 15% less take up, what does that do to our net present value? Um, what's the change in the net present value if we have a 3-month acceleration in the project, so go a little bit quicker, or we have a 12-month delay in the benefits realization? So, and by that, the benefits realization is ultimately by changing those bits depending on the length of the initiative as well. And then we can also maybe look at the development cost. The capital cost was quite significant. So what if we have a 10% reduction in the benefit cost and a 20% increase? Now, why are we going different percentages up and down? Well, sometimes it's easier to overspend than it is to underspend in a sense. So what we want to be trying to do is look at our past data, our past experience. How good are we at delivering? If we quite have a range of, we can be 20% over and 10% under is what we get from our company data, then these are the rates that we can use within our sensitivity analysis. But what we're trying to do here, and in this case, it's very simple depiction, but regardless how we've tested these through these sensitivities, they've all remained positive in terms of their net present value. So therefore, that would give us a fair bit of confidence. Of course, if we started saying, well, the adoption rate fell and development costs increased, then that's going to give us a bit more of a challenge. But we use your judgment in terms of how far do we want to go.